Alright, let's see. I'll read two of these. Play with ambiguity. To capture and hold attention, you need to show attributes that go against your physical appearance, creating depth and mystery. If you have a sweet face and an innocent air, let out hints of something dark, even vaguely cruel, in your character. It is not advertising in your words, but in your manner. Do not worry if this underquality is a negative one, like danger, cruelty, or amorality. People will be drawn to the enigma anyway, and pure goodness is rarely seductive. Alright. Daily law, no one is naturally mysterious, at least not for long. Mystery is something you have to work at, a ploy on your part, and something that must be used early on in seduction. And then for today, know when to withdraw. Love never dies of starvation, but often of indigestion. That's hilarious. The Russian seductress Lou Andres Salome had an intense presence. When a man was with her, he felt her eyes boring into him and often became entranced with her coquettish ways and spirit. But then almost invariably something would come up. She would have to leave town for a while, or would be too busy to see him. It was during her absences that men fell hopelessly in love with her, and vowed to be more aggressive next time they were with her. Your absence at this latter point of the seduction should seem at least somewhat justified. You were insinuating not a blatant brush off, but a slight doubt. Perhaps you could have found some reason to stay. Perhaps you were losing interest. Perhaps there was someone else. Daily law. In your absence, their appreciation of you will grow. They will forget your faults, forgive your sins. The moment you return, they will chase after you as you desire. It will be as if you had come back from the dead. Both of those are from the Art of Seduction. The first one was send mixed signals. And then the second one was give them space to fall. The pursuer is pursued. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, what the heck do I have in here? I don't remember getting anything carbonated. But it must be an energy drink. What the heck did I get? I don't even remember. It's good. It's tasty. Alright. See what's going on today with the dogs. Hopefully everybody behaves. Hopefully it's a nice light day. That would be good. Alright, where's my opener? There we go. Yeah. Yeah, that second one, it seems pretty common sense. I mean, that's where the saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder, comes from. Because things that are in your presence seem to become commonplace too quick. Excuse me. And that applies to everything. That applies to items and people, everything. It's like when you get a new car, you haven't had it long, so it's like new and shiny. But the longer time you have it, you're like, yeah, it's just my car. And you kind of just don't appreciate all the qualities that had sparked your interest when you first got it. Now that you've had it for a while, it's just my car. And I guess that kind of applies to like relationships, like new relationships. It's all super exciting when it first happens, and after a while, it's like yeah, that's just my girlfriend. Somehow I've seemed to avoid. I think somehow what happened to me is as odd as it sounds. The unintended benefit of having had what happened to me happen is like it keeps everything fresh and new no matter what. Like even the day itself. And I think that's how I've been able to keep the freshness of my personal relationship alive. Because I'm constantly fascinated by her, anyways. Everything about her fascinates me. Just her personality and her spirit and just the way she is. She's so much different than everybody else, which is like, that's what keeps it fresh too. It's like I have daily interactions with everybody else. Like when I go to work or whatever. So to come home to her is like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh, thank God. Away from the normies and back with my woman. That's really when my day begins, is when I get back home. And unfortunately, I'm so tired from having been out in the world with all the normies that when I get back home, it's like a lot of my energy's gone, but that's like the most exciting part of my day. Everything else is just like, eh. But that part I get. That makes sense. So for me, it's a little different, only because my mind has been restructured in a way that's kind of helped prevent that from setting in too much. Like even with my example with like a car, like this car is relatively new for me still. So, but even so, it's like, I think it's cool. I have felt like I had like a vitamin in my pocket. I guess not. Big old screen. I don't remember if I talked about that last time I came to work this way. That is a gigantic set of screens on that building they put, I guess, to advertise God knows what. It just looked like a mess. I didn't even see anything that was being advertised. It looked like like abstract art. Oh, it's funny. So Joe Rogan had this guy on, and this guy had a very interesting point of view. And he was talking about, they got into the subject of like the plague, or like when the Europeans first came to America, how the history books say that all the diseases that the Europeans brought is what wiped out the Native Americans. And his theory, which kind of makes sense, and as much as Joe wanted to push back on it, every time Joe would push back, the guy would explain further what he meant. And Joe didn't have much to say after that. He did. I mean, there was kind of one point where he kept trying, but Joe kept trying to like kind of push back, like, no, that doesn't make sense because of this, that, and the other. And we know this because of viruses, and we know this because of like, antibiotics, or whatever. But the guy's point and theory was Like the further away you stray from nature, the natural. And I've thought about this too. Like the human species is out of balance with nature, and we do everything in our power to make nature conform to us, as opposed to the rest of the natural world, which just conforms to the natural flow of nature. We've done everything to make our lives as static as possible, and the immediate natural surroundings have to stay static with us in order for us to be comfortable. And he said it's that kind of mentality and that kind of like out of balance with the flow of nature that has knocked a lot of our our symbiosis out of balance, and that has an effect on our immune system. So when things come around, like say a new virus or something like that, and his point with the Native Americans was it was the Native Americans that started living more of a European style, or having the Europeans have an effect on their behavior was what knocked them out of balance and ultimately led to a lot of the death that we attribute to just plain disease. Which is interesting, I thought. I can't say either way. I mean, I always question what we're told about history anyways. So when this guy started saying stuff like this, I'm like, well, this could make sense too, because who knows what really happened. I mean, we know what we were told happened. And pretty much that's just stories that were handed down from the past. But I don't know. And he was giving other, the guest was giving other examples of how that has happened in the past. With just living out of balance with nature. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. But it was funny to see like Joe really try to resist what this guy was saying. And this guy was like very relaxed and calm with how he would reply to everything Joe had to push back on. And even as he started saying some of this, even in my mind was like, wow, that's pretty far out in terms of where you're taking that theory, because there's a lot of documented evidence as to how much we didn't know about viruses and bacteria and stuff like that. But the more Joe made this guy explain what he was saying, even I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And even after this guy was like done with a whole long explanation of what it was that, because he would have to elaborate. Joe would say something and he would have to elaborate even deeper into what he was saying, using like scientific evidence for like how plants and animals react to environmental changes. And it would just make sense. Even Joe would be like sitting there quiet, like, huh. I thought that was pretty interesting. Because, as well read as Joe is, he can sometimes come off as like a know-it-all. And you can see that side of him coming out in this interview. But then you saw like that side diminish too. Like, huh, okay, that kind of makes sense. I thought that was kind of funny. Great interview. Oh, and he said even there was a lot of this conversation too that was like even veered into biblical history and some of the things that are explained, like especially early on in Genesis with the Garden of Eden and the fall of man and the eating of what we term an apple but the apple itself might have just been symbolic of the ingestion of knowledge in a way that took us further away from our natural origins, which I've always thought about too. It's like, take the story of the Garden of Eden as like a metaphor for how the origin of how everything was at one time was, instead of just being like a pure creation story. God made a garden with just two of each of whatever. If you strip away the specifics of like religion, prior to ingesting knowledge, we just were like every other animal, and everything in the Garden of Eden was in perfect balance and order. And it wasn't until that experienced knowledge was ingested that things started to stray a little further away from its organic, center, which is in perfect balance. That's something I've thought about a lot of recently too. Is like, especially having conversations with somebody like my mom. She tends to be very negative focused. Her attention tends to focus a lot on all the terrible things that are happening in the world. She's got a real negative opinion of like humans and all the things that humans do. But I have to kind of remind her, and this is all taking place over text messages, I try to remind her that it's all the negative stuff that catches your attention most easily, because that's like your animal instinct is the power of your attention as an animal, which humans are, is first and foremost for the purpose of self-preservation. Like, it's to keep you safe. So like way back in the day when we were like hunting and gathering, and even before tribal, like huge tribal organization, if you're just out there on your own walking through the forest or whatever, all the average things that are around you don't really catch your attention. It's not until something out of the ordinary comes around that really piques your attention and like keeps you on alert, because you got to stay alive. So that's the origin of like how not so much negative is like the wrong word to use. Potential threat, maybe, let's say that. And things that are negative could be a potential threat. So it's like right now on this car ride home, to work, my attention is mainly focused on what's in front of me. There's 0 cars in front of me, so this ride is easy. All the cars that are passing me and all the cars that are around me, barely paying any attention to it. If there's a car accident though, my attention is immediately going to be attracted to that. And that's like a negative on the road, as opposed to all the mundane positive that I'm experiencing right now while I'm driving. So someone like my mom, when she sees like all the terrible, that's all the news is showing you anyways. It's all the negative stuff. They're not showing you all the beautiful things that are happening and all the good things that the humans are doing for each other, right? All the charity work and all the feeding the homeless and all, there's a immense amount of that happening in the world, but none of the news really shows you that stuff. They show you all the war and they show you all the conflict and all the things that you should watch out for. But if none of that was ever on, you would never even know what was happening. So that tends to be what people like my mom think is mostly what's happening when it comes to human activity. And I have to remind her that that's not how it is. Everything is in perfect balance. And I've said this before too. I sound like Joe Rogan because I'm repeating stuff. Like when I started thinking about this, like the world's not as bad as we think. Matter of fact, the world's in perfect balance and harmony 100% of the time, whether you know it or not. It just kind of depends on where your attention is focused. And the example I always use when I tell people stuff like this is like, let's say for like a human, one of the most beautiful experiences you could have is bringing a child into the world, right? Especially if you wanted that child. In my case, it was a bit different. My children they weren't planned. It was just, somebody got pregnant and I was like, oh, okay, so this is something I have to deal with. So I wasn't exactly excited for it to happen. But in the case of people who are fortunate enough to plan to have a baby and then that happens, that's the most beautiful experience someone could ever have. But as beautiful as that experience is, the equal and opposite experience of that is happening in the world also. And that's the balance. If you think of like the scales, what keeps them in balance is the equal weight of what's on each scale. So what I tell people is that I tell them, okay, right now, someone just had a baby, and it's the most beautiful experience. You're gonna love and care for that baby the duration of its whole life, and it's what they always wanted, and it's exactly what they just got. But at that exact moment that that baby was born, someone else in the world just killed the baby that they just had. Say they were raped, or something they never wanted. Say they have mental illness. Just say something, whatever the circumstance might be, that they never wanted to have a baby, but they were forced to for some reason, and they just killed it. That's the balance of this experience. And then there's a spectrum in between, notches of experience that are happening from a little less good to a little less good to the middle point where it's neither good nor bad. It just is. And then it just starts to get more negative and negative and negative. And everybody's attention is a little bit different on that spectrum. Everybody's attention's focused a little bit differently on there. I try to stay as dead center as possible. And I try not to get, see, that's the thing too. The world tries to pull you one way or the other. And it's, I think, not good to be hyper focused on either end, good or bad. Right? To be so hyper focused on only the positive stuff, you're completely ignoring some of the negative that is taking place in the world. And the negative stuff is what could be improved. So that's not good to ignore either. But to be solely focused on everything negative, well, now you're just so black-pilled, you don't think anything good is happening. And a lot of dis-ease comes from that. A lot of stress, anxiety. They say maybe even cancer comes from something like that. That you've ingested so much negativity that you can't release, that it starts to fester inside the body. I've heard people say that too. But that's what that conversation with Joe was primarily about. The unbalancing of human consciousness and our biological place in this system has been infected, I think would be a good word, with thoughts and activities that keep us out of balance, constantly out of balance. But it definitely was a great conversation. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, because I didn't know where it was really going. So the guy started to really say some stuff. I was like, ooh, okay, this guy's got it. This guy gets it. And at first when he was talking, I was like, oh man, Joe's gonna tear this guy apart, because this kind of sounds a little too woo-woo for how Joe's mind works. And I haven't watched probably, I don't even know how many episodes he has, but I must have seen at least over 1,000. I've been watching him for years now. And I know I've seen over 1,000 of his episodes. Probably close to way more than that. So I can kind of, after watching him Joe for so long, you can kind of tell where his mind's going to go. You can predict the things he's going to say, or the quotes that I'm sure everybody who has watched him as much as I have kind of does the same thing. It's like, oh, now he's going to talk about the Younger Dryas impact. Now he's going to say this. Now he's going to say that. Now he's going to bring up this. Bob Lazar, he's going to bring up. He's kind of predictable now with what he's going to say. But with this guy, I knew he was going to push back, but I didn't predict that he was going to not so much give in, but start to seriously consider what the guy was actually saying, without dismissing it mentally. You could see in his mind as the guy was talking. You could see on his face his mind was already resisting. No, that's not right. So when he got a moment to talk, he would push back. But he started doing that less and less as the conversation got deeper and deeper. Oh, that's interesting. Alrighty, I am arriving at my destination. That looks terrible. Somebody needs to pull those weeds. Finally washed my car. I haven't washed my car in like, I don't know, months? Months. Over less than a year, but I'll probably almost close to it. Alright, I have arrived at my destination. And boop, back up though. Alright, I'm here. Hope everybody has a great day. Alright.